Bienvenidos a esta nueva entrega de Conversaciones de Poder Ambiental. Hoy tendremos una conversación con Pavan Sukhdev, que es un personaje súper importante a nivel internacional en términos medioambientales. Antes de empezar con el espacio, me parece importante decirles que esta entrevista estará completamente en inglés y la pueden ver con subtítulos, tanto en inglés o en español, en YouTube o en Spotify. En Spotify estamos saliendo en video y en YouTube también. Esta conversación también la pueden encontrar completa en Instagram, pero la idea es que podamos tener personas de diferentes partes del mundo. Entonces, si tienen problemas siguiendo el inglés, pueden ver el ejercicio con subtítulos, por favor. Esta es una conversación muy importante, de manera que los dejo con esta entrevista que hice al señor Pavan Sukhdev. Que la disfruten.
Muy buenas tardes a todos y a todas las personas de Poder Ambiental. Bienvenidos a una entrega más de Conversaciones de Poder Ambiental. Estoy absolutamente emocionado el día de hoy porque estoy acá con el señor Pavan Sukhdev. Pavan Sukhdev es físico de la Universidad de Oxford. Trabajó por más de 15 años en el sector financiero en el Deutsche Bank. Fue director de un esfuerzo muy importante que se llamaba TEEB, que es un acrónimo por la economía de los ecosistemas y la biodiversidad, que fue muy importante para poder explicar en términos económicos la importancia de la biodiversidad y de los servicios ecosistémicos. Fue presidente de la WWF, es decir, la del Panda, una organización global muy importante, y actualmente es el CEO de GIST Impact. Mr. Sukhdev, welcome to Poder Ambiental and thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. Great to be with you again, Juan.
Perfect. Mr. Sukhdev, so let's start with a basic question, and would you please explain to us what is ESG and why is it important?
Absolutely. Well, ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. And these are three aspects of the performance of a company, which the originators of this idea of ESG felt were not being paid enough attention. Now, I'm talking about 2004, when there was a conference held called Who Cares Wins? Not like the Hollywood film Who Dares Wins, but Who Cares Wins? And this was held by the UNGC, the UN Global Compact, by IFC, the International Finance Corporation, and 20 quite significant investors. And their purpose was to try and bring environmental impacts and social impacts of a company and the governance of a company and its quality, bring that into the framework of investing, because they felt that investors were not paying enough attention to these very important social and environmental aspects, nor indeed to the importance of governance. Good governance is a driver of low negative impacts on the environment and high social impacts. And of course, you need to look at the quality of governance. These were things that, in the view of these 22 odd investors and groups, were not paid enough attention, hence ESG. This was the origin of ESG. And then from there, it developed to an approach to evaluate impacts. Environmental, social, and governance aspects started getting ranked or scored, and that led to the creation of ESG ratings and rankings. This was in 2007, 2008, and by 2012, when I came to learn of the progress of ESG, already there were more than 250 ESG ratings and rankings. Today, there are more than 600 of them. So this is the short story of ESG. Today, ESG is used for creating ESG indexes, which are used to create assets called ESG assets. Basically, ESG funds are created and people purchase these funds in the hope, I would say in the vain hope, that creates sustainability.
Okay, so the importance of ESG is because it serves to show investors if companies are doing their part in the environmental component.
Environmental and social, yeah. So the idea is that you should be able to understand your particular sectors or your company's risks and opportunities to do better from an environmental and social point of view. Yes, that's right.
Okay, so that's the intent, and that's how initially it was born. But you mentioned some things that initially it was like 250 and now it's 600. So it's not standardized, and over the last few years, we have seen some very heated controversies on ESG, specifically in the United States. So could you please explain what has been the ESG backlash, please?
Yeah, well, from being a way of evaluating the social environmental performance of companies to becoming a favorite way of ranking funds. I mean, the size of ESG funds has grown to several $1 trillion. We are talking about almost 20-30 trillion dollars of funds, which is expected to become 50 trillion over the next few years by 2025, according to Bloomberg. Now, so it's become quite a big thing in the sense that a lot of financial flows and assets are following the ratings of ESG. When it becomes so big money is interested and big politics is interested. And the big politics of the US is, as you know very well, especially on one side of the spectrum, is very involved with the oil and gas sector and with what I have referred to as the brown economy, as against the green economy. So clearly they had a problem, and they have been objecting to the use of ESG ratings to such an extent that Republican states have asked their wealth funds, basically the pension funds, the public pension funds and the public pools of capital, have been asked to get out of ESG assets because it is, as they see it, politically charged. Now, the reality is climate is about science. It's not about politics. But of course, politics becomes involved, because without politics, you cannot resolve climate change. So politics becomes involved everywhere. No surprises. The Republican Party has reacted very negatively and very strongly. But it's not just them. It's not just them. Elon Musk complained and sent a few angry tweets when Tesla was removed from the S&P Sustainability Index and Exxon remained. Exxon is the oil company. Elon Musk is creating cars to solve the problem. So, one can kind of understand why he's upset. And not only that, but a big bank, Deutsche Bank, a big European bank, has an asset management arm called DWS. DWS is a securities firm. They basically are the asset management arm of Deutsche Bank, and they got into trouble because they were using a particular set of ratings, ESG ratings and rankings, representing that their funds were more sustainable than the reality. And they got into trouble with their own regulator, BaFin, in Germany, and with the Securities and Exchange Commission in the US, and the SEC actually fined them. So, it's been a combination, a kind of a storm of problems occurring, and a lot of resentment and anger at the world of ESG.
And you think that part of the problem may be because if you have 600 of those, if you have the oil or the companies that don't behave as well can choose the one that fits them better, and because they have more money, it becomes more popular.
Yes.
So, if ESG are so important, how can we possibly get behind the backlash?
Right. I mean, that's a great question, because, the politics is driving the backlash as of now, although some of the backlash is being driven by genuine concern about the nature of ESG ratings. Now, the question is complicated. To solve the problem, you need solutions to both. One is that the ESG itself has to become more defensible, which means less easy to attack. Today, anyone can look at ESG ratings, compare 3 or 4 leading ratings like MSCI and Sustainalytics or Refinitiv or whatever. Say, look at this, they don't correspond to each other. They don't look like each other at all. And that's true. There is a problem because there are so many different methodologies. Then you could also argue, as has been done, that ESG does not measure impacts, but it was not designed to measure impacts. It was just designed to say what is good governance and bad governance, and then what does it lead to in terms of good and bad environmental and social impacts, in terms of, and then give you some ideas as to, maybe I can do this differently, maybe I can change my energy use, maybe I can be more concerned about my employees and have creche inside the office of the company so that mothers can look after their babies better. Maybe I can do so many different things to make myself more responsible as a company. That was what it was meant for. What it has been used instead is to become the means of rating an asset, a bond or an equity, and that gets in the way of the flow of money. And when you tell money where to flow, it doesn't like it. So that is the problem. So it becomes about money and politics, and that's going to be a problem. Even if we fix ESG and say, okay, and I can go to that if you want, how to fix ESG in terms of what is wrong with it.
Please.
Yeah, you see, well, if you remember back in 2004, it was clear in the document that was written, Who Cares When, that governance is the driver, is the foundation of everything. Good governance in terms of the policies, procedures, and controls that are in place at a company to ensure that its key resources are defended and protected and enhanced. What are the key resources? Number one, people. Number two, capital. Number three, reputation, right? So governance is all about policies, procedures, and controls to ensure that people, capital, and reputation is enhanced. Now, that should be rated separately. That's a whole separate area to be rated. And then you look at the results of good or bad governance to say, okay, have we therefore, as a result of good governance, improved our environmental performance? Number two, improved our social performance. Number three, improved our performance vis-a-vis employees, their knowledge and their skills and their health, human capital. That's about impacts. So after you've rated governance, you should move to measuring impacts. I think that has the real solution to this problem, which is that stop calling it ESG because it is already being attacked. It will continue to be attacked. It is a bad measure. It doesn't measure anything in particular. It has created politics and the flow of money in ESG assets, so-called ESG funds and ESG ETFs, exchange-traded funds. It has created all kinds of things for which it was not intended. Stop doing that. Instead, do what you should have done, which is to go back to the 2004 document, measure governance separately, and for that you can use ratings, governance ratings. And secondly, measure impact separately. For that you can use economic impact. What is impact? Impact is the change in human well-being as a result of the activities of a corporation and its value chain. Impact is an economic quantity. Impact is about changes in produced capital, which is your shareholder interest. So that is obviously already there. Everyone measures and reports it. Produced capital, human capital, that is the health and knowledge and skills of your employees. Natural capital, that is all of the ecosystems, biodiversity, resources that are there for people to use forever, the public goods and services. And lastly, it's about produced capital, which you already measure. The land, the buildings, the factories, the copyrights, the patents, the software, and so on and so forth. So it's a collection of assets which need to be measured in order to be managed. And today we are only measuring the produced capital. We are not measuring human capital. We don't measure how good or how much is the increase in the knowledge and skills of our employees every year. Nobody does that. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't measure even human health impacts on the employees. So human capital is not being measured. Natural capital is economically invisible. That was the reason I had the project called TEEB, which you mentioned, the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity, which is all about how do we make natural capital from being invisible to being visible, right? How do we see it and then bring it into policy and so on? So all of these other impacts on human, natural, and social capital are simply not being measured. That has to change. And then we will have the real solution to the problem that you described.
Okay, Mr. Sukhdev, but according to what you were saying, we would need to decrease the level of uncertainty on the interpretation of the importance of that. And that will lead to the unification of criteria. For example, national accounts are very good at that.
Yeah.
But we don't have that in terms of ESG. And to what you were saying, this is I mean, I read this book very often because you were one of the editors of this amazing publication, which gives economic tools to value nature. However, by implementing this, you can get different sets of results. So you need standardization.
Exactly.
How can we get to that adding a level of complexity that standardization, I think that it's not only a technical process, but also a political one, because it underlines truth, so
Yes.
this is, and truth entails power. So how do we move to that?
Well, I think the way to move to that is to firstly engage all of the key agents of society, which means the policymakers have to be engaged, the business has to be engaged, the investors have to be engaged, and of course, the citizens have to be engaged, the people who vote, the voters have to be engaged, right? So number one is to engage all agents of society and the economy. Engaging policymakers is already happening, and that's what people like me have been doing. When I was the study leader of TEEB, the book that you mentioned, I took it across in different ways, through policymakers, through business, to various CEOs and environment ministers and business ministers and policymakers and so on. So we have to engage all of them and explain to them that this is a general problem which affects overall well-being, because the impacts of corporations are 2/3 of the economy and employment. They are the biggest force in the economy. So, but their impacts are not being measured. Now you need to bring the lens of measurement on the impacts and then start managing them through standardization and policy making. So number one, when you're measuring the impacts, you can't have 600 different ways of measuring it. You have to have only one way. And that's, thankfully, that is happening. So the good news, Juan Pablo, is that today, thanks to the good work put together by the TEEB community, by the Natural Capital Coalition, and then by the what we call the Capitals Coalition, which included the Human and Social Capitals Coalition, and by people like the Value Balancing Alliance and the International Foundation for Valuing Impacts. All of these people I've named more or less in sequence when they were formed. The IFVI and the Value Balancing Alliance were most recent, and the others were earlier. All of these institutions have been created by policymakers and key businesses and academicians, and they are preparing standards. So the standard will soon be ready. There's already a draft standard, VBA 2.0, Value Balancing Alliance 2.0, that is for impact valuation. And we are hoping that a better and more comprehensive standard will soon be there, combining the efforts of these people. The Value Balancing Alliance is in Frankfurt. The International Foundation for Valuing Impacts, set up by Sir Ronnie Cohen, is an international foundation, and they are also collaborating with VBA. So we'll have one standard for measuring impacts. That's good news, right? But that's not enough. The question is, who is going to follow it, right? Unless it's great to have a standard, but if nobody is following the standard, then what's the point? So to make people follow the standard, we have to have regulators, policymakers, basically. And this is, again, where there is good news, because already, even before the standard is available, the European Commission, through the system called ESRS, the European Sustainability Reporting Standards, which has been mandated in law. So this is a law in the European Union, mandated by the so-called CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. CSRD is an actual law that was passed by the European Parliament, right? So the law is saying, go into this direction, create ESRS, the European Sustainability Reporting Standards, for companies to report their impact. So this is already happening. Now, of course, what they don't have is these two things coming together. The standards have to come together with the reporting regulation. And that's the missing link. That is being worked upon right now, but it's not finished yet, because the standards are not yet ready. The regulators are very upset with the misuse and abuse of ESG ratings and rankings. So they have introduced the rules already, saying you must report this, you must report that. Today, it's quite a challenge, right? Because they're saying you look at a total of 823 indicators of sustainability data points, mandatory, you must look at them, and another 275 you may look at. So total 1,102 data points have to be looked at. You then decide as a company which of these is material for you and which is not. You then decide how to publish it, and then you publish it. Mike, that's a lot. That's a complicated exercise. Of course, the big four are very happy, because it means many thousands of billable hours which they can put, but that's not going to solve the problem, because not everyone has got so much money to pay thousands of billable hours to the big four accountancy majors. And we need simple solutions which are cheap and easy, so that every company, the world has hundreds of millions of companies. They are not able to pay the fees of big consultants, right? They need simple standards which everyone can implement. And that's where we need clarity on impacts. We need clarity on impacts, and we need the standard to come out, making it easy and simple and clear for any company to publish its impacts, to calculate it and publish it.
Okay, Mr. Sukhdev, and you were mentioning impacts, but impacts, I mean, you have, for example, in here, two sets of measurement. Again, from the one that could originate from the private companies and the one that we have from national accounts. Do you see a future where some sort of measurement like ESG may be compatible with national accounts?
Yeah, it has to be. Juan Pablo, you're an economist, so you know that you cannot have the macroeconomic indicator being completely, at a different, on a different basis compared to otherwise the two will not meet, right? The macro has to meet the micro. Look at it today. Today, when the, as you know, but I'm just saying for the benefit of your listeners, today when the national accountants measure GDP of a country as a measure of its macroeconomic performance, they will look at microeconomic indicators. They will add up the profits plus the salaries plus the rents plus the net interest plus the depreciation added back to measure the value added. So this is a way of doing value addition, but it is being done, compiled at the micro level and added up to give a macroeconomic indicator known as GDP. So this is the so-called income method of GDP, and most statistical offices around the world use the income method. So actually, there is a strong connection between the way GDP is reported and how it is compiled from the micro level, the corporate level. Now, if we adjust the GDP and say, okay, GDP is wrong, it doesn't account for natural capital and human capital, okay, fine, yes. But if you change it and you don't change what is happening at the microeconomic level, then there's a problem. Because then, from the macro level, it's coming like this, and from the micro level, is going like that. It will not add up. The microeconomic indicators for performance have to add up to the macroeconomic indicators. So value addition at the micro level needs to add up to value addition at the macro level. And that is already happening when we look at the GDP compilations today. But it is not going to happen unless we ensure that at the microeconomic level, corporate performance level, you don't just measure value addition for shareholders, but you also measure value addition for other stakeholders, such as employees, society, and future generations. When you do that, then you will have a set of micro indicators which will actually be able to add up into the adjusted GDP at the macroeconomic level. Today, we have micro indicators called profits and salaries and rents and blah, blah, all that. It adds up to GDP, and that's fine. It's a way of deriving value addition at the macro level by using the microeconomic level. So that's the gap that we have to fill. This is the gap between the microeconomic performance metric and the macroeconomic performance metric. We can't simply adjust the macroeconomic and do nothing with the microeconomic level. So therefore, by the same logic, just as we are using profits and salaries and net rents and so on and so forth, and net interest of the companies, which the companies pay, we will have to adjust that with externalities to be able to come to the corrected GDP. You can't have one without the other.
Exactly, but when you go to externalities, which for the listeners are not accounted costs that are created by institutions, either private or public. So the economic way to do that is through internalized externalities, which is to give a price signal
that's right.
that will let the consumer know that the social cost of X product is larger than the actual production cost. But that entails regulation and higher prices. So in some way, so for example, a lot of institutions mention the importance of reducing economic incentives for fuels, for example. So the idea is that the price of fuels increases through time. And that has happened here in Colombia. Over the last, I don't know, year and a half, the price of fuels has increased like 75%. And although it's environmentally important, people are not happy.
Yeah, no, this will happen. This will happen until such time as the alternative comes up and is provided at a better and lower price. And by the way, that is happening. But sorry, let me come back to a point that you made about the internalization of externalities will affect the price. But it is 2 points I'll make. One is that some externalities are negative, like environmental externalities. Some are positive, like the externalities of let us say CSR programs, or the externalities of training by a company. I remember doing a calculation around the time that we first met in 2012. That was for my first estimate for the positive externalities of an Indian technology firm known as Infosys. It was in the billions of dollars. It was $1.1 billion and $1.2 billion. I remember that. Positive externalities, right? Why? Because this company hires maybe 25, 30,000 people every year and trains them up. And yeah, some of them leave. And the ones that leave, which is about 15, 16% on average attrition in that market, those 4,000, 5,000 people are carrying with them the knowledge and the skill that they learned at Infosys. That's a positive externality because it's a benefit to other companies, not just in India, but in Silicon Valley, in Australia, in UK, etc., etc. So there are positive externalities as well. We need to account for these externalities. I think in accounting for externalities is the step one for internalization. Step two is when regulation charges you for the negatives and rewards you for the positives. So I'm saying that you need step one, at least account for the externalities before you get to step two, which is the internalization of those externalities. And that's definitely something that is desirable. And by the way, all those data points that are required, that are being asked for by the European Commission, will be very helpful. In fact, they are essential to be able to help us to calculate the externalities. But just collecting data is not going to solve the problem. The next step is collect the data and convert that into impact accounts, means the accounts of the company, not just for the shareholders, but for stakeholders. So 4 dimensions: natural, human, social, and produced capital. Even that is only stage 2. And then you need to go to stage 3. So stage 1 is collect the data. Stage 2 is convert it into information, which means impact accounts. And stage 3 is institute policy measures to reward those who generate positive impact and to penalize those. Penalize also, right? It's a zero-sum game. You cannot only keep rewarding people and never penalizing them. So we have to do a combination of rewards and penalties for creating positive and negative externalities.
Okay, so in some way that would lead to the modification of corporations. So on that regard, in 2012, you wrote this amazing book that is called Corporation 2020. And if I may, and please correct me if I'm wrong, you suggest here that corporations should shift the way that they think and that they act. And if they do so, we could move from a brown economy to a green economy.
Yes.
So the question, the last specific question that I wanted to ask you, after 12 years of writing this book, do you think that we are closer to the 1920 corporation or the 2020 corporation that you envisioned?
I'm sorry to disappoint you and your user and your viewers, but I'm afraid the answer is the former. We are still more like Corporation 1920. But maybe, Juan Pablo, we need to explain to the viewers why I said Corporation 1920.
Please.
So in 1919, Henry Ford was taken to court by 2 of his shareholders, the Dodge brothers, the people who make the Dodge motor cars. The Dodge brothers were investors in Ford Motor Company, and they took Henry Ford to court because he would never pay them any dividends, never. And they said, this is wrong. We have invested in you. And he said, no, I need to make the Ford Model T cheap enough for every American citizen to buy. Every American farmer should be able to use the ethanol that he grows from his sugarcane and fuel his Ford Model T and buy and drive the Model T. So he was just investing in his plants and investing every penny of profit that he made, reinvesting it, and not caring for his shareholders because he was the main shareholder anyway. So, it's his company. So they were very upset and they went to court and they won. And they won actually on the issue of minority rights. And, a majority shareholder cannot mistreat the minority by not giving any dividends for years and years, even though he's making a profit. But in the dicta, which means the text at the end of the judgment, the judge wrote the immortal words saying, "And Mr. Ford should know better than to work against the interest of his shareholders." Suddenly that became the mantra. That became, oh, see, the company's purpose is the shareholders and the profit of the shareholders. The court has ruled this. Now we know what the company is for. It is to make profits for shareholders. That became Corporation 1920. The whole world then evolved. And then along came 50 years later, Milton Friedman, who said, yeah, the externalities doesn't matter. That's the government's problem. The company's purpose is profit. He wrote an article in the New York Times, and it was, again, very popular and famous. So all of these forces in 1919, that is 1920 roughly. By the way, that was a court case in the Michigan Supreme Court where Henry Ford lost and the Dodge brothers won. And so I'm saying that 100 years after that, that was in the days when we were trying to move away from the horse and carriage and convert into motor cars. Like, come on, guys. I mean, we have to wake up. We cannot use the system for cooperation that was there in 1920. You have to change it because 100 years have gone by. And therefore, you need a new system. And that's what I'm trying to describe. But unfortunately, still, apart from some good effort that has been made on externalities and, like CSRD and double materiality and so on, which is very good. It is the necessary steps on internalizing externalities. But other areas which I pointed out are still a problem, right? We still have unaccountable advertising. So the laws of advertising accountability, no. We still have unlimited leverage. So there are no limits to leverage as yet. And we still have more taxation focusing on the goods, which means basically generating incomes and generating profits are taxed, but using resources and public goods is not taxed mostly. I mean, royalties are tiny compared to the total amount of income tax and corporation tax. So we are still doing three things completely wrong, in my opinion. So yeah, maybe I can say that 1 out of 4 is successful, that people have understood that you need to change, but the remaining 3 out of 4, still nothing has been done. So the answer is,
if I may, Mr. Sukhdev, you also mentioned in your book the importance of lobby that they have on, the corporations influence the way countries develop policy.
Correct.
That favors them, So all the political processes that we were mentioning are heavily influenced for those interests, for them not to lose shareholder value, which is it's extremely complex. But yeah, do you think that as climate change becomes more threatening, because lately very heated summers, very heavy winters here in Latin America, in Bogota, we have a water drought, and we have, for example, also floods in some parts of the country. So do you think that the political landscape may change as climate change hits harder, and companies will say, okay, maybe we're
But then this goes to the questions that you mentioned, right, about power and politics. Because today what has happened is that power, which is the ability to change a pathway in life, in human life, that's whose ability it is. It is the ability of money. So money is dictating power. In the old days, before we had financial markets and economies, power was about military, and somewhere in between, the power was about religion. So power has always been captured by certain institutions, whether it is the military or the church or the market. Today, the power is in the market's hands, right? Because money dictates power. So now the question is, to change that is difficult. So you have to find a solution that uses economic power, because the power of money is still there, and shows to it that it is on a trajectory towards ruin and disaster if it continues to do what it does. So I'm not trying to change the ownership of power from one institution to the next, and we don't really know. I think, in my opinion, it's the citizen who ultimately has power and should take back power. But what we have seen in the last 2,000 years of especially European history is power shifting from the military to the church to the market. And I don't know where it'll shift, but I would love to see it shift to the hands of common people, you and me, basically, right?
Okay. So, Mr. Sukhdev, the last two questions are that we ask all our guests. It's what is power to you that you just described? So the missing question will be, what is politics to you?
Politics is about the exercise of power. It is the rules and regulations that enable you to exercise power in an orderly way. And therefore, politics will always favor and support the current regime, the current equation of power. Today's power, as I said, is concentrated in the hands of those who have money. So money dictates power. Earlier on, it was religion, and before that, it was military. Politics will decide how money dictates power. And look what's happening, right? So today, the lobbying that you pointed out, which is carried on by corporations, is a way of exercising that power through the mechanics and the institutions of politics. Export policies, import policies, trade regulations, taxation, all of these things can be changed. These are institutions. Taxation is an institution. Import and export, the Global Agreement for Trades and Tariffs and Trades, GATT, that's an institution, right? It is constantly battered by lobbyists left, right, and center who are exercising their power, their money power. Same with climate. After all, we end up having more representative of the oil and gas business in a climate COP than you have people who are supposed to solve the problem of climate. What is this? I mean, how can you have a president of a COP who is the CEO of an oil company? That is like saying that, I'm going to have world peace and I'm going to have a meeting on world peace, and the person who is running that meeting is the CEO of an armaments company.
But Mr. Sukhdev, on that point, Karen, I mean, isn't it good to have the possibility to talk with them directly? Because
we have to talk to them and show them that people will stop people. Hopefully exercising their power, but again, it is through markets, through economic decision choices, will stop purchasing cars. They will use public transportation, and they will use only public transport which is powered in a sustainable way. And so changes will happen in lifestyle. So what I'm saying is that the currency of power has changed from military might to religious influence to monetary power. And that currency is changing, but I don't know what is the next currency. So it may be some other currency of power, but right now the currency of power is money.
Is money.
Yeah.
Mr. Sukhdev, thank you so much for giving us that space, and mainly for the work that you do, that it has been so important for the entire world. So thank you so much for this space, and hopefully this won't be the last time that we speak.
Look forward to that. Take care. All the best.
Okay. Thank you.